a hard time in any of the topics. Like it's not like a hard time, but how do you say this? Like, okay, data centers in space was a kickoff for me. Like I had to go deep into that rabbit hole. But then there are some sort of familiarities that you can always apply because physics are physics everywhere. And I had to go back to the periodic table and then like, okay, fusion. How do you pronounce them perfectly in English? Like,
Yeah. I mean, people say rocket science, kind of it's the hardest thing. But then you have nuclear where it's actually not all like the chemical elements that you have in the Mendeleev table, but you have all the isotopes. So you have this chart of nucleides that we typically operate with, and you have like hundreds of elements. So it's even like more complex than the table of elements. But yeah, I don't know. People like to say rocket science, but maybe nuclear it seems to be more complex. Hopefully, I'll give a simplified and easy to digest explanation.
I am certain. Would you like to tell us what you're building right now?
Yeah. So Apollo Atomics, we make the most compact nuclear reactors. These are water-cooled reactors, kind of the most common type of reactors that you find worldwide. The most compact, but also with the highest uptime. So they are very reliable and then can be deployed in less than 24 months.
Okay, this is kind of very much aligned. Still the same thing. I'm glad. Like when you started the batch, it was the same thing. I see batch, and then when you're leaving, it's still the same thing. All the materials are still intact. Then let's take a step back and try to understand first nuclear energy. Like help us break down fusion, and then which one are we sitting on, and then from there we can take a look back at the system which provides us these nuclear energy plants, and then from there we can move to which exactly you're building, which is the most exciting part of the conversation.
Yeah, sounds good. So nuclear, you have two types of reactions. You have the fission reaction, which is taking a very heavy element. There's typically not very stable. If you leave it for a very, very long time, it will disintegrate into smaller atoms. So you start from there. Typically, for us, we take uranium-235, shoot it with a neutron, and it will split and make more neutrons. It will shoot other uranium atoms and then split them again. And in that process, you release a lot of energy, to put it shortly. And that energy can be converted into first heat, and then converted into electricity, mechanical energy by turning a turbine, and then into electricity. Fusion is a bit different. You start with the smallest element. It's on the other end of the
periodic table.
Yeah, table of elements. So you start, for example, with hydrogen or some variation of hydrogen, like deuterium or tritium. So this is one proton and maybe one or two neutrons, and then you fuse them. And in doing that, you actually creating a heavier element and getting more stable, and that stability will enable you actually to release energy. And so this two ways of releasing the strong nuclear force. It's the force that actually binds neutrons and protons inside of the nucleus of an atom. And it's several orders of magnitude higher than the electromagnetic force. For example, if you have chemical reactions, let's say when you are in a natural gas plant, you make energy by burning natural gas. The energy that is released by either fusing two light elements or splitting a heavier element is typically 1 million times more in terms of energy produced. So there's a lot of energy. And in one sense, it's very good because we need energy. But in the other sense, you need to control it and build a device that is able to convert it effectively from heat to steam. And then that steam will be sent to a turbine, turns the turbine and make electricity. So the turbine will turn the generator to make electricity. So we're in that business. We're in business of being able of converting a lot of energy, a lot of heat into steam. And what happened historically, when you look at the very first attempts into converting and controlling nuclear energy, typically in the 50s, is what we did is we took the steam generators that we have designed for coal plants or for natural gas plants, and then we plugged them into nuclear. So essentially, you took a device that was
actually, like, that was something that I was gonna touch base too, but then you went very fast forward. Like, go ahead, like, this is cool.
Yeah, so kind of I'm building the plant, starting from the fuel and building the plant. So they have the controller.
Maybe before building the plant, just to give a brief history of nuclear energy, like then it started with the science, trying to understand atoms, right? And trying to see, maybe even one step back. Did you ever take interest in more the sun is an energy source for our planets, and instead of chasing sun for energy, that you chase the atoms. Like, was that really natural selection in your brain, or you got like gravitated towards atoms and nuclear energy, or was it always around this energy concept, and then you picked this one because it was something that you felt really, let's say, equipped to solve?
Yeah, I was always interested by energy, whether it's fossil fuels or renewables. I actually studied electrical engineering before studying nuclear. So I did renewable system design at one point. But essentially, the idea here is to say, when you look at solar, for example, even wind, the origin it's nuclear. Solar comes from the sun, and sun is a nuclear reactants are happening there. And wind is kind of a variation of that, just by the effect of the sun on the atmosphere of the planet. So it's really, when you go to the origin, all the sources, even if you look at, fossil fuels has been stored. These are like plants that have died and they got concentrated under the earth for millions of times. And then now we're taking them back. So those plants, what they did is essentially took the sun, the energy of the sun, and then converted into hydrocarbons, and then just concentrated for millions of years. And that's coal, that's natural gas, that's oil that we use. So in the end, everything comes from the sun, and the sun is a nuclear energy device. So if you want to kind of chase the ultimate source of energy, the most dense source of energy, it's nuclear.
Then, before also going into the deep in that topic, what are the misconceptions about nuclear energy? Because the moment, right, we started with science, and then science brought us to, okay, now we can really make something with this. And then we figured out sort of like the nuclear weapons era started with all the atom bomb and so on. And then there we transitioned into more like actually we can have power, generate power. And the moment that is like 1970s onwards, we can scale this, and then we can try to establish those plans. But then things went wrong. And then like Fukushima and Chernobyl, these are the like major level 7 accidents that happened and gave us this scary thought about nuclear energy, that perhaps that we can maybe break down those collective mirages that we had built in our minds. Like, what are the common things that you come across, and then you try to say, these days are over, we are in a different era?
Yeah. So I see that you reviewed the INES scale level 7 for Fukushima and Chernobyl. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. Let's start by safety. So when you look by the numbers, so you take all the energy that is generated by nuclear since it was created, so since the 50s, and then you look at all the casualties that happened, including all the accidents that you mentioned, so Chernobyl, TMI, 3 Mile Island in the United States in 1979, and then we have Fukushima. The number of casualties per terawatt hour or megawatt hour generated is the lowest of any other energy source. People typically don't realize that we have accidents that are related to, let's say, dams for hydroelectricity, that are related to the process of sourcing and making solar PV panels, or even operating solar PV panels. So when essentially you look at the life cycle of all these sources, and you look at nuclear, because of its energy density, one single plant can produce a lot more energy, and you look at the casualty, actually very, very low, and you divide it by the amount of energy that is generated, it's the lowest of any other source that we have today. So in terms of safety, if you look at the numbers, these are the numbers. And then if you look at how people look at it, it's different. It's similar to how some people look at aviation. Aviation is the safest way of transportation, but people still, look at these very, very rare events that happen, and kind of, since it's very rare, it's not, part of our daily life, which is good. But people see them as catastrophic. But in reality, when you look at the numbers, it's one of the safest, if not the safest, source of making energy. So that's the misconception number one. And there are several things that I need to precise here. So the technology that we do is what we call pressurized water reactors. So the two main incidents that you mentioned that are in a scale 7, this is Chernobyl and Fukushima. These are different types of reactors. Pressurized water reactors were developed in the United States, and they've been the safest by far compared to any other technology, any other. They operated under land, so the submarines typically use this technology, and then also above land for commercial purposes.
Do you want to mention what sort of reactors they were, just to give the insights?
Yeah, so pressurized water reactors, it's essentially water that is used to cool the fuel. So the fuel, when you put all these, this uranium in a certain volume, remember when I told you like that neutron will go and split another uranium and split another uranium. So the closest the uranium it is to each other, it will generate more energy. And so you have the fuel, the water is used to remove that. So it heats up and then goes into steam generator, which is the part that we're innovating on. And that steam generator will boil water, and then the water that is boiled, that steam, it will be sent to a turbine. It turns the turbine and makes electricity. If you look at Chernobyl is a reactor that uses graphite for moderation. And, one of the biggest consequences, if you have an issue with those, is that will heat up and will release a lot of dust that is radioactive, which can be problematic. So this is, the Russians have abandoned that technology a long time ago. And then the other technology that was used in Japan for Fukushima was boiling water reactor, which is similar. They use water, but it's a different approach. In pressurized water reactors, you insulate everything that is close to the fuel. And so the steam that is generated in a steam generator is completely separate and independent from the water that goes around the fuel. So it's very, very safe technology. As I said, the longest in terms of the operating experience, and the worst incident that we had is in a scale 5.
You already identified that too. In the worst case of the worst case scenario, then you don't exit level 5.
Yeah, so you have, okay, so this is 2011. And then after 2011, we start seeing a shift in terms of how we design reactors. We were shifting now to what we call passive safety. And so in our case, our pressurized water reactor is designed with passive safety embedded in the design. So it's much more safer. Typically, when we look at to evaluate safety, is this figure called core damage frequency, is the likelihood that something bad will happen to the fuel. And that figure, if you take our design approach with passive safety, and I'll explain what it is, you will reduce by 2 orders of magnitude the likelihood of getting that. So you're taking the safest technology that we have, and we're making it even safer by 2 orders of magnitude in terms of frequency. So what is passive safety? Passive safety means that you have the reactor, and if anything bad happens, you don't need to intervene.
Mm-hmm.
Everything will take itself, all the reactor will take itself into a safe state using just the physics of gravity. So essentially, the reactor will scram. There is no fission reaction. You still need to remove what we call decay heat. And that decay is removed using gravity. So essentially, if you boil water in the kitchen, you have the hot water that will go up, and then the cold water goes down. So that's essentially what's happening as we cool the reactor, and that can happen for many, many days without needing a human to intervene, without needing also any active pumps, anything that requires electricity. For those who are familiar with the Fukushima plant, is that they lost electricity, they lost their diesel generators, and they didn't have any electricity. So now, and you don't need those active sources of power, active pumping. So literally everything will take itself to a safe state without having to intervene.
Actually, it's comforting to see that you broke it down and then show that the one that we are building today is different than the ones that caused those big troubles. Because indeed, like technically, yes, the incidents or the cause of that situations are almost like similar. Like there's no like a big thing, but the problem is that once that accident happens and the radiation starts going out, there's like I think in Japan and Ukraine both, 160,000 people relocated in Ukraine, and in Japan it was 220,000 people, and then it had also like kind of generational effects with the ripple effects on all the things, and then it started to develop cancer in people and so on. I guess this hopefully is going to a little bit of clarify and then take the fear from people's minds.
Yeah, and we can spend some time a little bit on Fukushima. So what happened in Fukushima is, one, we need to like remind people with the numbers. So the casualties happened because of the tsunami, not because of the nuclear accident that happened. There was radioactivity that was released. Again, with our technology, that scenario will be very, very unlikely, and it's another level of safety that we're offering for our product. But then for specifically the Fukushima accident, no casualties are linked directly to the nuclear accident. And then you have a decision. It was a political decision of evacuating the land areas around the plant. Many people will disagree that was not necessary and created a lot of fear. Actually, some people, if I remember correctly, some people died because of the rush that happened as they were trying to leave quickly. But yeah, when we look at the numbers, again, 0 casualties related to that accident. Of course, you don't want radioactivity to be released, and that's very important, and that's what we're working on as I described in our safety case.
Then, if we now try to picture this in our mind, let's see the nuclear power plant as a big system, and then help us understand how you do the subsystems of this big system and where exactly your solution is happening. And then we can, again, go layer by layer, like peeling the onion now.
Yeah, so you essentially have 3 major systems to do the main function of a nuclear plant, which is converting uranium energy to electricity. So the first system is the fuel. That's how you engineer how the fuel is laid out within the plant. And so that's important. That's the first system, I would say, the fuel system, to make heat. Now the heat needs to be removed and converted into steam. And so that's the steam generator. That's what we're working on, and we'll spend time on it. And then when you convert heat into steam, that steam is sent to a steam turbine, to not confuse with a gas turbine. A steam turbine that will be turned, that will have the same shaft as a generator. So the generator will be turned and makes electricity. So again, you have the fuel, you have the converter, which is the steam generator, and then you have the steam turbine. On top of that, you have what we call auxiliary systems, safety systems. So if anything bad happens, these systems will intervene. But the main functional systems is the fuel, the steam generator, and the steam turbine.
And then like the rest, like we need to make sure that it needs to be close to a river or a lake so that we have the water supply, right? Or is it outdated already?
It's not necessarily. So you can run a nuclear plant without having what we call a heat sink. So typically a river or a large body of water, like an ocean or a sea, is used to cool what we call the excess heat. But you can use what we call air condensers. You can essentially just remove the heat and remove it to the air using what we call air condensers. So you don't need to use water. It's a little bit more expensive as a solution when you look at the total cost of the plant. But just to clarify, you don't need to have water. Actually, the largest power plant in the United States by power, it's called Palo Verde, is using the wastewater of the city. I'm trying to remember which city. I think it's in Arizona, if I remember well. It uses the wastewater of the city to cool the plant. So it's also, that's another situation where you don't need like clear water or the river water or the sea water. Yeah.
And then today, when we establish the plant now in our heads, and then yes, we have where the reactions is happening, And then we do, this is like if I call nuclear reactor, the whole thing. And then in between we have the turbine and the steam engine. And then from there we generate energy and send it to the city, the people that will need. In your case, this is your customers, and your customers are gonna be data centers, I guess, right? Like whom are you targeting in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, the most demanding segment of our customers right now is data centers, because we need to store data, we need to train models. And so, yeah, the biggest segment in terms of growth today is data centers. So we're seeing a lot in terms of the people we're working with, but not necessarily only these. So our reactors can power residential areas, can power university campuses, it can power industrial facilities, because we make steam and electricity. So remember, if you just keep the first system and the second system, if you have the fuel and the steam generator, you just make steam. And there are many, many applications, industrial applications, where they need steam for chemical processes or pharmaceutical processes. And so we have customers that are just using steam only in comparison to cases where you use electricity.
It's a nice way of also enlarging your customer base at the same time. But then when we zoom into the steam generator, then right now you guys are saying you found a way to make it way smaller. And how is it gonna affect the individual's life out there? What is gonna change in my life? And then what numbers are we talking about in terms of scales and the effect?
Yeah. So remember when I told you the uranium is a million times more energy dense than natural gas or coal. So we have huge potential on the fuel side. And the converter that we had, that we typically took, the steam generators, the main design was invented at the end of the 19th century and didn't really change. If you look inside what's happening, it's a bunch of tubes inside of a pool of water, to make it very simple. And so those tubes will heat up, heats the pool boils and makes steam, and that steam is sent to the turbine. Now, if you have a lot of potential in the fuel, but you're able to convert 1/millionth of it, because that's what you took from coal and natural gas, you're not leveraging the full potential of nuclear. What we've been working on is a steam generator that has an order of magnitude higher capability of removing heat from the same volume. And so, to make it very simple, inside, we've been able to shrink the size of the channels. So remember, I told you it's a bunch of tubes. So when you reduce the size of the channels, you can make much more channels per volume, a lot more. And so you can remove the heat exchange surface area will be much higher. So you can remove much more heat per unit of volume. One analogy I typically give is, think of this like transistors in a chip. So the smaller the more you can put per chip, the higher the compute power. That's what, NVIDIA is solving for, or Intel. For us, the smaller the channel, the more power you can create, or more steam you can create per unit of volume. And so now you have this device that can make a lot more power, can convert a lot more of that potential that we have with nuclear fuel compared to what we used to have. When I say a lot more, an order of magnitude, right now we're working at a factor of 20x. So it's a lot more in terms of efficiency of the space. And people typically ask, how is space efficiency linked to cost? Because in the end, that's what matters. For us, what we do is we change the paradigm in terms of how we make a nuclear plant. If you want to build a traditional nuclear plant, the one that are currently installed in the market, let's say you call Westinghouse, which is the main reactor manufacturer in the United States, Westinghouse will just send you components to the site. They will not send you a reactor. So you have to assemble it yourself. You have to do all the major welding. You have to do all the testing, and you have to do to build the civil structure, essentially the house of the reactor yourself. And typically that process takes a very, very long time, because you have to do all these tasks at the same place and the same time.
And also you need to do approvals, right, in between. It's not that you can just put things together. Like, you need to also apply for certain permissions and approvals.
Exactly. And every plant is different. So if you get, If you don't have a standardized product, you might have to iterate a lot with the NRC, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission here in the US.
Yes.
But what we're changing is that now that we have reduced the size of the largest component dramatically, now we can assemble the whole reactor in a factory in a high productivity environment. So typically, if we look at the numbers, productivity in manufacturing, meaning inside a factory, is 5 to 10x higher compared to a construction site. And so if we shrink the largest component dramatically without reducing the power, we can assemble the whole reactor in a factory, test it there, have a much better quality assurance, quality control, and we'll deliver the reactor ready to run at a fixed price.
So that's what you delivered on the truck, literally.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And again, this is, if you look, there are several companies that make smaller reactors assembled in a truck, but the way they do it is just by reducing the power. It's way less power because you have to make it small to make it fit on a truck. But if you can keep the same power level and at the same time reduce the size, now you have the power, which is typically linked to revenue. And at the same time, you reduce the cost because typically, first order of magnitude, size of the plant dictates the cost. So the larger it is, it becomes a mega project and it takes a long time to assemble and to build.
And then we are talking about 10 plus years, right? And at the cost of 20 billion?
The last construction project in the United States, this is the Vogtle plant in Georgia. They built 2 units, Vogtle 3 and 4. Each one of them costed roughly about $15 to $17 billion total.
What megawatts are we talking about?
So we're talking about 1,100 megawatt total.
All right. But just to come back to the size, multiple questions, but then maybe starting with the size portion. What is the trade-off you guys are having there? I understand your design is inherently different, and then you have a different design approach with the size and letting the steam leave the reactor. But at the same time, there must be a trade-off. There's no free lunch.
There are so many trade-offs. But I would say first, if you want to essentially locate us within the map of all the nuclear reactors that you find today in the market, I typically like to split them into 2 groups. You have group 1, these are the legacy reactors. These are water-cooled reactors that we've been building since the 60s and the 70s. This is Westinghouse, General Electric, Rolls-Royce, EDF in France. They've been building the same reactor with no major change, making them bigger and bigger during the past 7 decades. So that's category. What is good about these reactors is that the supply chain is available. If you want a pump for a Westinghouse reactor, you have 4 or 5 suppliers. They can make it for you at the lowest price and highest quality. And they are very reliable. They run at over 95% capacity factor, particularly in the US, and over 98% available. So they're very reliable. Actually, it's the most reliable assets that you can find today in the market. Everything included. And you have group 2. These are what we call typically generation 4 reactors. These are reactors that use different fuels like fuel or metallic fuel, or use different coolants like sodium, high temperature gas like helium, or use molten salt. And these reactors are completely different. Again, they use different components and different systems. And these guys need to raise money essentially not just to build the product, which is a reactor, but need to raise money to build the whole supply chain around it. And Apollo approach is to say, wait a second, instead of reinventing everything, the fuel, the coolant, and trying to figure out a whole new reactor design, can we pick one single design change, start from what we have right now, the reactors that operate very reliably, and pick one single design change that can give us the highest impact in terms of cost and in terms of the development and deployment time. And that's why we focus on the largest components. We reduce the footprint, make it way better, much safer to deploy the nuclear that we know today and that we know how to operate at a very high uptime.
But at the same time, I'm just trying to make sense. This is almost like a 20% of the entire factory setup, isn't it? Like this piece, or is it like how would you rate it, like in terms of criticality and also in terms of the setup, like literally physically, because the impact is huge. Like you lower the cost, not like 2 times or like you lower the cost plus you make it faster. your claim is like you're gonna do this in up to 24 months, whereas people are talking about 10 years of time frames.
Yeah, less than 24 months. Yes. So typically the question that we get is how changing one single component will give you that massive impact.
Leverage, yeah.
And so typically we have several layers where we can achieve cost reductions. So first layer is the component itself. So the steam generator, when you reduce its size, again, an order of magnitude, now you use less materials, you have less labor hours, because the old steam generators, typically you have to weld the tubes manually, and it's very consuming in terms of labor hours. And the facility that you need either for testing, R&D, or production is massive. So we can make our steam generators in much smaller facilities. So the cost of the steam generator, the component itself, is reduced significantly. And then, since the major component is much smaller, the whole reactor can be designed to be much smaller.
Mm.
And so, again, an order of magnitude, I can't give you the exact number now, but an order of magnitude also on the reactor size. And so now the reactor will use less materials, also can be assembled in a factory in a high productivity environment, as we talked earlier. We have a 5 to 10 increased productivity. And so we are able to reduce the cost of the reactor itself on top of the component. And then, now that the reactor is much smaller, the buildings don't need to be that large. So the buildings will also be smaller. So you have less concrete, less rebar, less labor hours on the site. And so you can reduce the cost of the plant, or actually the major building in the plant.
But the pressure vessel remains the same, right? Inside the nuclear reactor, the pressure vessel is the same. I'm just shrinking the...
Yes.
Right? But then isn't it bigger than...
So, yeah.
Isn't it bigger than that? Like, I'm trying to just visualize it.
Yeah. If you look at, if you picture what we call a nuclear reactor building, so if you walk into a nuclear plant, you have this massive building at the center that's typically cylindrical, but it doesn't have to be. It's typically cylindrical. It's the largest building and the most complex to assemble. And in that building, if you look inside, the pressure vessel is really a small fraction of it. The pressure vessel is where the fuel is in a traditional loop type reactor. And then you can see this massive component is about 4-story tall building high that is called the steam generator. And that's the one that we're focusing on. If you reduce the largest component in the installation, the building does not need to be that big. And so that's...
It's actually really, it's always depending on the pictures you hunt on internet, because I've never been in a nuclear energy plant, but then a couple of the pictures always looks like the pressure vessel seems to be bigger than the steam generator that we are talking. I always kind of little bit of, or like they are very smaller, like close to each other. But then when I find the reasoning behind all the innovation that you guys are discussing, then hold on, like indeed, like you shrink it. Like the moment you shrink that, you shrink the entire reactor, and then you can pack it to the truck and then send it away.
Yeah, so this is the third layer. So you reduce the footprint of the building. And then the fourth layer is the financing piece. So now that you're able to assemble the nuclear hardware in the factory and test it there, and you deliver it to the site ready to run, you only need to do installation. So you effectively reduce the construction time to less than 24 months. The payments that you typically have to do, because to build a nuclear plant, you need to raise money, and typically you raise loans, debt, and you raise equity. And as long as you're not producing power, so during 10 years, you still have to pay interest on your debt and return.
Just one question. Can you get loan from the bank for such an innovation, first of its kind?
You can, but typically what happens is that the government has to intervene because this is highly risky. This is first of a kind. Otherwise, you'll get you'll get a high cost of capital, which makes the reactor project non-bankable. So at this point, and the Department of Energy is doing a great job at this, is you want for the very first nuclear reactors where the risk is high to get a low cost on the capital, particularly if you're more than 2 years. Because if the longer the construction time, the more you will have to pay. And you will have to pay this in the next 2-3 years. So in terms of net present value, it's the highest. It's much more important than the revenue that we make 10 years from now. So it's very important to optimize for the construction time. And this is what we're doing, reduce construction time to less than 2 years, so that the cost that you pay on the capital is reduced significantly. And that's the whole production.
Yeah, I like it. Thank you. And when you also provide the reactor, but still, this needs to fit into the system that people already have in place. So then how do you simulate all the alternative scenarios so that your product is custom enough to fit in and at the same time generic enough to be able to, like, a piece of puzzle piece that you can always like plug in place?
Yeah. So there are several things here. So for a new plant, we can work, and we already have commercial agreements and MOU signed with the leading suppliers for the nuclear industry that manufacture what we call systems for the balance of plant. So this is anything after the steam generator, because they are very conventional. It's off the shelf that you're taking it. This is the commercial part. This is a non-nuclear part. This is not the part that has to be N-stamped. It has to have nuclear quality assurance. This is very commercial. There are many suppliers that can supply it and also be certified to make those components for you. For an existing plant, so let's say you have a coal plant. A coal plant is a similar principle. Remember, you have heat, boils water, makes steam. The steam goes to the turbine, turns the turbine, makes electricity. You can swap the boiler of a coal plant by a nuclear reactor, and then leverage the existing infrastructure, typically the steam turbine, the generator, the connection to the grid, the switch yard, all that is already there. It has to, depending on, it's case by case, depending on the plant and how old it is, but it can fit into an existing installation. There is already fossil fuel, whether it's coal plant or a natural gas plant, so you can decarbonize the installation while having to pay only for a reactor, essentially.
What keeps you up at night? Because it sounds like everything is very smooth, but I'm pretty sure there are certain things keeping you awake.
Yeah. So we talked on the technical side. What you care about is the reliability of the component, because when you deal with energy infrastructure, it's not that you have something that works in Eureka and great, it's working. You need to show that it works reliably for many years of operation. And so these are the tests that we're running at MIT, is to show that the component in the long run will not fail with a high confidence level, looking at several phenomena that might fail the component. We'll look at corrosion, we'll look at thermal fatigue, we'll look at fouling, crud deposition, and many other phenomena that in the long run will be problematic. And this is why where it becomes harder. If you want to innovate everywhere, you have to do this on every component. But for us, specifically, we're focusing on one component, and since it's small enough, we can do tests we call one-to-one scale. So when you go to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, you just show them the data. You don't have to do any modeling or scaling. You have to do modeling for optimization, but really for the safety case, you just run the one-to-one scale on the steam generator and give them the data. So that's on the technical side.
One question: those steam generators, are they also like super? I forgot the name, but there's another type of reactors that is for more like scientific projects, more to understand how it's gonna happen, and then you kind of go one level up and then do properly in the real life. How are you generating data? Is it what percentage is simulations, like based on really the data? Percentage of it is really something empirical, like engineering.
Yeah. So in the steam generator, so you have one side, specifically for our case, you have one side that is only liquid. So you don't have a phase change. You just have only liquid. This is the hot part. And that's typically the models that we have in computational fluid dynamics, CFD. We have good models. You can model that and you don't need to do a lot of testing. Typically, the models are very good. When you go to the steam generating side, this is a part where you start as liquid water and you ended up with steam, and in our case, superheated steam, which is way better. The the change in the phase is very, very complex. Right? It's described with what we call the Navier-Stokes equations. So the Navier-Stokes equations don't have, or we didn't solve them analytically. And so if someone does that, we'll win the Nobel Prize or the Fields Medal. I don't really know. But so far, you need to run a lot of tests. And that's the best way, practically speaking, of how you can actually make a component that has enough confidence to get the approval with the regulator and also get your performance that you're looking at. So this is why it is important to run a lot of tests, and we've run a lot of tests within MIT and within our new facility that we're building right now.
And in terms of technical readiness, I guess you guys are now on level 7, if I am not mistaken, 6, 7, right? And what are the next milestones moving forward so that you're going to bring us this abundance energy?
Yeah, so in terms of TRL, technology readiness level, 7 means that you have a component that is running at the operational conditions, so same temperature, pressure, and chemistry of a commercial plant, which is the case. And you need to show long-term reliability. It's not that you show that for a week. You need to show that there is reliable for many, many years. And in our case, of course, we don't have 10 years to run the tests. So we run what we call accelerated time condition testing, which essentially, to make it simple and not share more than I should, you torture the component and make sure that it survives.
It's like pushing it to the limits, like where it will break.
Yes, exactly. This is TRL 7. TRL 8 is getting all the permits, the certifications that you need, whether on the supplier side, on the nuclear regulatory side, meaning the safety side, and we're working on that. And then TRL 9 is commercialization.
And it's out.
It's out, yeah. And it's important to highlight that the technology readiness level for many of the group 2 that I mentioned earlier, the generation 4 reactors, is still pretty low, particularly on the reliability aspect. Being able to justify the high time, being able to justify that for long periods of time, you don't have to shut down every 2 months to solve whatever issue that you have.
Speaking of shutdowns, if you target for data centers to be very specific with your users, your customers, in a situation that they are running on like 99.999% of arrived, like it has to be up and running. My questions are twofold. Number one is, what is the backup plan that in case something goes wrong? And then how much of a time would you ask them to fix the thing? Of course, it might be like big and small. And the other one is, how about the grid reliability? Like, how do you look into the entire system together?
Yeah, so there are 2 ways of doing this. The second way is more novel. The first way is you plug into the grid. You have, at this moment, you have to wait 5 to 7 years to get connected to the grid because the authorities need to make sure that they have enough additional capacity to feed your data center, and you're not going to pull more from the grid, so the prices will increase for everyone. And everyone will essentially complain. So the way to do it is to say to people, we have to wait until we install a new natural gas plant or a new coal plant to be able to increase the capacity so you can connect to the grid. So some of the people are saying, okay, we don't want to wait. We don't have time. Is moving fast. The models are developing fast. There's competition, and there's China. There's actually 2 to 3x lower electricity cost compared to the United States. They're like, okay, let's not think about the grid. Let's create our own system. Let's have a generator, have a data center, and a connection, connect them and make electricity. The issue there is you have an asset risk. If you have only one generator, if you lose it, you don't have power. You have zero. And so the way you design this, and we're looking closely with our customers, is that you have to create enough redundancy. And with nuclear, starting from a system that is 98% availability, has 98% availability factor, that's much easier to achieve. You just have, let's say, if you want 100 megawatt electric, you take 10 of our 10 megawatt reactors, you plug them into your 100 megawatt, or let's say slightly lower in terms of consumption. If you lose one or have to stop for refueling, you will just lose, one reactor, 10 out of, it's 10% of your assets. But 98% for every reactor, if you look at the whole system, 10 reactors, you get you to the 99.99 that you're looking for.
Mm.
But if you start with a reactor that is, we haven't operated before, you started typically, the French tried, for example, sodium cooled reactors. It's, typically in the best years, it was like 40 to 50% capacity factor. So you have to make many, many, many more reactors to make sure that you meet that reliability level if you want to connect to the grid.
Yeah, makes sense. But at the same time, are you always going to be aiming for grid independent power, or you will be also moving the general public as well?
Yeah, so we have several solutions in terms of power capacity. So our first reactor is 10 megawatts. We do 50 megawatts and we do 300 megawatts. All can fit on a truck. And 300 megawatt on a truck, that no one can do that. We're the only company that can fit 300 megawatt on a truck, one single module. So 300 megawatt, that's better for the large grid. And so, speaking about the grid itself and trying to increase the capacity and being able to increase the capacity and capacity that is clean and reliable, that's our solution for that. The smaller scale, 10 megawatts to 50 megawatts, that's meant for behind the meter, typically outside of the grid, because you want that redundancy to get the reliability level.
Okay, cool. Actually, then those are also, at the beginning, I was thinking more because of the magnitude of the energy that you heard milestones and then you move. But then at the same time, indeed, then it also opens up the new channels for you to reach out to new customer base and expand it to what, $1 billion market, like to just like virtually to speak about.
Yeah, it's a huge market. When you look at the power, and what we're seeing right now is people are willing to pay a premium on the price of electricity if you can deploy energy faster behind the meter that is reliable.
And then for them, what would be the experience? I'm your first customer. Like the moment that you reach the level 9 and then you will knock on my door, hey, I'm sending it. So how is the experience going to look like for me?
Yeah, so you typically start engaging with the customer way earlier. So the preparation for finding the site, getting the permit, getting the structure of who is the operator. In our case, we're starting from, remember, water-cooled reactors, the old technology they've been running for a very long time. So we partner with existing operators that know how to run these reactors at over 98% availability factor. And so you need to operator, you need to bring the financing structure, which might include the government, might include banks for the non-equity part, and then you might have several owners. For us, for the first plants, we will look at being part of the ownership, and so you need to bring that together, and then you need to have the permit, the site permit, and then you have the technology permit. We're working on the technology permit on our side.
At the moment, in the US especially, there are those presidential initiatives like the encouragement that we have been seeing. And one of the key reasons was, in their reasoning, was like 80% of the last 10 years nuclear energy came from China and Russia. And then yet the US, we are one of the pioneers, but then yet we are not able to catch up because we had a time the industry almost froze. And then now, do you feel that the regulations are moving much faster, and at the same time the government is also opening you the paths normally that would be taking much longer time?
Yes, and that's very important. For a very, very long time, we haven't built reactors in the United States. Since, we built 2 units, as I mentioned earlier, Vogel 3 and 4 in Georgia. But really, that was it in the past 30 years. And so we lost the ability to design the plants and also to build new plants. And during that same time, China specifically was building gigawatts of power and actually bought all the reactors from all over the world. And then now they're building their own version, their own technology specifically. The government, I think now we're at the stage where there are several things, and for us, we like to say there are several stars that are aligned. One is that the demand is high, so we need to increase the capacity. Two, the structure that we have, the fleet of reactors that were built in the 60s and the 70s will retire at some point. So you need to replace those assets. So you need to replace those. You did a lot of extensions, we call long-term operation, LTOs. for many of these plants. So typically in the US, we're extending up to 80 years. So that the plants are looking at 100 years of operation. But at some point, you need to decommission those and build new assets. And so you have demand, which is increasing capacity, and you have replacement of existing reactors. And the demand is increasing exponentially, some people like to say, but when you look at the price, the escalation on the price of electricity is double of the inflation. If you put your dollar on average in capacity expansion, you will get twice what the if you put it just on T-bills. So the government today, and also in the previous administration, had several incentives, whether it's tax credits for building new capacity or increasing the capacity of existing plants. And then last year, we had 2 executive orders that reduced the licensing time, which is the approval, the permitting review time by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, by more than half, reduce that cost. And
what exactly the scenario was there when you were applying for? What exactly did you apply for in that?
So for us, the fees that we have to pay, so you have to pay the regulator to review your application to get a permit. And as they spend hours on the reviewing process, you will have to pay them. It used to be like over $300 the hour. Now it's 50% less, so about 100.
It really is.
So that's one. The second executive order is on limiting the review time, or putting a cap on the review time. It used to be you submit an application for a new nuclear plant
forever.
You have no idea when you get a response. And now it's limited to 12 months for an operating license and 18 months for a design license. So that has been very helpful in terms of given predictability. For us, when you look at our timeline, this is one of the drivers. Getting the permit is a necessary condition to build a plant.
But I'm just thinking now, even if you speed things up, even if you make the complete construction much easier, faster and cheaper, and at the same time, this amounts to 70% of the entire cost, right? Like we're talking about holistically, the product, this construction part itself is almost like 75% of the entire thing.
So when you break down like the cost of nuclear lifetime, so you operate and you construct and you bring this to the present, so it's present value. The very first plants typically have a large chunk of capital costs. It's literally like over 50% interest on the debt and return on equity. And then you have effectively about 10% that goes into the construction of the plant. And then about 10% related to fuel. And then the remaining is operating costs.
10% fuel, about the lifetime. You're talking about lifetime.
Yeah, through the lifetime. Yeah, about 10%, which is good. If you look, for example, if you compare nuclear to natural gas is typically about 70 to 80% cost of the fuel. So if, something happens in the world and then the price of natural gas increases, does 2x, typically your cost almost gets 2x of electricity. You're exposed to high volatility of your fuel. For nuclear, if uranium, for whatever reason, does 2x, that's not a big hit to your bill of electricity. And this is why, when you look at the history, in 73, the first oil shock, France decided to have this massive program of building nuclear power plants. And actually, when you look at decarbonizing the grid, that's what they did. Within 15 years, they decarbonized practically all the electricity grid a long time ago. And they did it for another reason, not for decarbonizing. They did it for security. So in case there is no oil or there is a shortage or the price increase and becomes crazy high, you have nuclear, and nuclear gives you that security in terms of cost of your energy. So that's what France did, specifically because they don't have oil and gas.
And then to come back to that, then in the end of the day, even if you speed things up, I'm just trying to see one more risk level at the big picture, then you still need to make sure there's a steam engine working, and a steam engine has the parts or plates, and then they are up to 7 years of timelines to get them, and know the demand and the supply part of it better than I do. Then how do you then still assume that this is going to be already happening? Because you might be very fast, But if one of the things on the critical path is not really moving, then this gonna slow you down too.
Yeah. I'm assuming you're talking about the steam turbine, which, as I said, to not confuse with the gas turbine. So it's a separate product. So really, the bottleneck today, and the in terms of getting access to gas turbines, because they are different in terms of the materials that they use, and they operate at much higher temperatures, and the lead time there is very, very long, typically 5 years, and I think in some cases even longer. So that's the we don't use gas turbines in nuclear plants. Steam turbines is shorter, a shorter timeline, and that's a very important point. I think I was going to mention this. One of the headaches that we deal with outside of the technical risk is being able to align all these suppliers. Remember, our technology is to not reinvent everything, is to have an existing reliable competitive supply chain, but still that supply chain needs to align with our timeline. So you need to make sure that, the person that makes the fuel, the person that makes the instrumentation, the person that makes the steam turbine, the person that makes boron 10, and many, many other things that you use in your plant can actually deliver on time. First unit.
And then, but the timelines are still, it depends on where you look in terms of the data sources, because I got to see some resources say 2-3, some resources say 2 to 5 years. Even for the indeed gas turbines, I forget about them, like they are even higher ranges. But in the end of the day, minimum 2 or 3, I could say, right? Like minimum, like everything goes super well and smooth.
Yeah. 2 is typical. Is on the longest range, and it's not only steam turbines. We have several things that typically takes 2, and we're working on those suppliers to align them for our first unit.
Tell us a bit more. Like what else is on the?
There are several things typical in nuclear industry. Anything related to fuel, close to fuel, is typically a long lead time. There are areas where you have only one supplier covering like 90%, 95% of the market. So it's not a choice. Really, like small things here and there, even if it's a small quantity within the reactor. And sometimes you need to plan very early. And this is what we're doing. Like these are the things that worry us as we plan for that first 10 megawatt deployment.
Then actually, this is kind of like you need to make sure everything is running in parallel, not like sequence way. Because if you wait for sequencing things, then you're going to just have the product and sit and wait for them to welcome you. Did I understand it correctly?
Yeah. You need to create more value, and anything we do, it has to be like 10x value. So we need to do way better than conventional nuclear vendors. I had a chance to work with many of them. You need to move much faster to be able to deploy within the timeline that we're claiming.
Awesome. And then actually when it comes to the data centers, GPUs run on AC. In a typical nuclear power plants that you go with AC most of the times. It might be a very detailed question, but do you see a way also to affect this, or this is not so critical actually? It doesn't matter so much in the bigger scheme of things.
Yeah, and so for us, just by the way we make electricity, it's going to be alternative current. And typically that's, what is designed for the existing grid and most of the assets. From what I know, the interest of having DC is on transmission. So when we have like long distance transmission, it makes sense. Maybe there are specific devices that require DC, and in that case, you need an inverter in the process. Really, this is, for us, the value that we bring is on the steam generation side. So we are a manufacturer of the nuclear steam supply system. Anything else, we think that there's someone else who does it better than us. We're not going to touch it. We focus on the highest value that we can provide in terms of deploying the core system of the nuclear power plants. But yeah, I mean, it's also up to the developer in some cases. If there is a developer that wants DC specifically for that application, they can use our systems to make DC.
Yeah, correct. In the end of the day, because you do your part, and then as long as the others also change it or adapt to their needs, then this is still already outside of your scope. Like you don't need to.
Yeah, so we make the life of the rest of. So we interact very frequently, and we have interfaces with balance of plant and the rest of the installation, the construction companies. we make their life way easier. Remember, the building, as I said, is much, much smaller. You don't have to do the assembly, the testing, the welding while they're doing civil construction and pouring concrete or assembling concrete blocks. So we make their life easy, much, much easier. For us, as I said, we aim to deliver what we call the nuclear steam supply system, which is, you can call it the reactor, as a fully functional unit, ready to install, ready to run when it gets to the site. And so that simplifies a lot how we typically build nuclear power.
Well, I still actually, when we speak about it with vocabularies and, anything sounds so easy peasy and really nice, flawless paths. But at the same time, this took you, how much of time we are talking about that you dedicated into research, you dedicated into hands-on engineering projects, and then it started to materialize if you take a look back at all the things that you have done so far, and then that made you start the company, and once you incorporated the company, things started to take off.
Yeah. I spent a decade in the nuclear industry, started working on design. I worked on the EDF, the French SMR reactor called Nuart, and then moved to operations, worked on operations in Belgium, where I was in charge and working on a few reloads in the Belgian fleet. So in Belgium, actually, nuclear is 50% of electricity. I think it changed since then, but it used to be 50% of all electricity in the country. So it's a big share of the electricity there. And so from operations back to design, so I moved to the United States and worked during my PhD with some of the leading reactor manufacturers, including Westinghouse, Rolls-Royce, Holtec, NuScale, looking at their designs and questioning every design choice in their solution. And that's where I started seeing that there is a path that is much more efficient in terms of cost, in terms of deployment. Without having to change everything in the plan, we can pick the right design choice. And that was literally my PhD thesis, looking at everything from, material science to thermohydraulics to project finance to infrastructure deployment. What is a single design choice that can give you an efficient to deployment and cost reduction? So yeah, when I get to that point, spend some time trying to convince some of the existing players, and then very, very quickly you're like, yeah, there are inherent reasons why startups exist. It's to move fast, and also to really start things from zero in some cases. There are some practices within large corporate in general that are just adverse to innovation. And I'm feeling very happy of how things are getting built today, particularly using AI. Like we haven't spent time on this, but like AI is a good part of what we do every day to streamline everything. There is, documents and bureaucracy. But yeah, that was the process of how we got into Apollo, and then we had a chance to work very closely with IT, and now we're scaling to a much larger facility.
There is a shift that we can observe that people are trying to build more of a small modular reactors. What is the thing that you see, but you think it's not gonna be easy to the others to build? Like, I don't want a secret sauce because there's multiple things when you build such an innovative product, but a couple of things are probably people are not seeing right now that you are obsessively seeing and are trying to make it happen. What are those?
Yeah, there are two things. Like, if you want to simplify decision making, what is the future of nuclear? There are two things: size and power. The larger the reactor, the more expensive it is on an absolute basis. Like, what is the cost of the plant? The larger it is, more costly. But typically, the larger is the more power, and more power means more revenue. So you have power and cost. So you have power and size, which are linked to revenue and cost. So can you increase the power without increasing the size, meaning without increasing the cost? And that's what we're trying to solve for. There are several companies making smaller reactors, but also small power. As I said earlier, we can put 300 megawatt on a truck. That's a lot more power compared to any other comparable in the market. And we can achieve this by focusing on increasing the power density of the system. So the power density of the fuel is very, very high. The rest of the system is pretty low. It's been very, very low since and now we're changing that. We're making the full nuclear hardware much more power dense. And solving for that means you can increase the revenue and reduce the cost as you deploy nuclear.
Actually, in that sense, that also we started to see startups popping up in the ecosystem, nuclear energy ecosystem. If you want to just break it down into companies like Valor, Atomics, or Oklo, and the rest, because what I see is like not all of you are really competitor. Like some of them are like the full design approach is different. They took it from a total different perspective. Some of them are still trying to do things on supply chain level. Like how would you give us this kind of mapping to say this is the differentiation where we are sitting and the rest are tackling in those paths?
Yeah. So you mentioned two companies. So Oklo and Valar, they're in group 2. So these are generation 4 reactors. Oklo is a sodium cooled reactor. Valar is a high temperature gas reactor. And so this group typically where it has better than water cooled reactors is higher temperatures. So there is a market for high temperature applications. Typically industry, chemical industries, a lot of high temperature. So that's a good market for them. And then as you mentioned, there is section there is making the supply chain for these people because you need triso fuel and triso fuel is not available. Now we're starting to make the first batches of that. So kind of trying to help these companies in group 2 to get their supply chain together instead of having them making it for themselves. So that's related to the design of the fuel. So triso, metallic fuel as well. We have companies also trying to solve the supply chain of the fuel itself, meaning the conversion, the enrichment, because for a long time, and I think it's still the case, the enrichment market was dominated by Russia. And now we're starting to see companies like General Matter, they're doing a great job at kind of bringing that back to the United States. Particularly for group 2, they need HALEU fuel. This is high assay, low enriched uranium. It's uranium that requires more enrichment than our group.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need more enrichment and you need enrichment capacity. But what I want to emphasize is that Apollo Atomics is a different category between these compared to these generation 4 reactors. We're starting from what is mature today and flipping one component. We're not designing completely new reactors. We're leveraging what works very well and solving the construction problem.
What do you think would break Apollo Atomics? Like what would be if tomorrow Apollo Atomics doesn't exist? What would be the reason behind it?
I'd say bad management.
Yeah.
Not having the right people. This is why we're very picky about the people we get into the team. We try to be very talent dense, pick the right people. The leveraging AI is also important. In many cases, we just compete against ourselves. Like really, we're doing things for the first time on many aspects, and we want to do it right and succeed there. So I'd say the people aspect, and then if there are elements that are outside of our control. For whatever reason, the United States decide to ban all nuclear power plants. I don't think that will happen, but there are things that are outside of our control that we can't manage. But really, I think it's the team, having the right team, and just scaling this technology, scaling to it's most of what we deal with is engineering risk. Is like, oh, how can we adjust this to solve this limitation or to meet this performance level?
Perhaps that we can a little bit dig into how are you right now leveraging AI from A to Z?
Yeah, the thesis is very simple. I can't give a lot more detail about this, but the thesis is very simple. If you look at the cost of a nuclear plant, you break it down differently. What is the direct cost? This is the cost of materials that you can touch, the cost of labor, the cost of systems that you literally can touch, and then the soft cost, or what we call the indirect cost. This is the cost of engineers writing documents or the cost of getting the approval from the Regulatory Commission. Typically, it's about 40 to 50, and like the first plants is about 50% of the total cost is soft cost. It's the cost of paperwork.
My
And
gosh.
if you look at any other source of making electricity, whether it's solar, natural gas, is way less than that. And so within nuclear, we have the biggest opportunity to tackle this bureaucracy problem through AI if it's done properly. And we have built our own engine here to have that capability and reduce that cost. So that's another area where we're very active.
Actually, that's also a major enabler, right? Not only building the product part, but on the operational side as well. That all those paperwork needs to go through a human being too in the end of the day.
Yeah. The organization of the way we're thinking, how we organize the company is completely different of like other vendors or how historically we've been doing. Like there are several layers that we don't need. Like the way we structure the team is different.
For your releases, you managed to pull a demo on the demo day in the end of your YC batch. Whoever is building hardware right now maybe could benefit from the way that you run the team, the way you guys are building and putting a cadence for yourself. Also feedback loops. What sort of feedback loops did you create for yourself to make sure customers are always incorporated?
Yes, I think continuous conversations with customers, also like scanning all the supply chain. This is because of the nature of our reactor design. We rely on existing suppliers, which is a good thing, but at the same time, being very, very connected to all the lead times that we have with our suppliers to make sure they can deliver on time. I think in terms of team and organization, the first thing you need to do is like hire the right people. When you get the right people, in many cases, you don't have to worry that much. And then, yeah, it's startup pace. It's not corporate pace. So it moves much, much faster. And we try to innovate every time in terms of, is that role really necessary? Do we have to do this? Like really questioning every task that we do and focusing on, okay, this is the goal. Are there better paths than the traditional path before taking the path? So, and it's surprising how things have been done for a very long time and how we can reinvent that, particularly with AI.
How could you keep yourself so fresh while you have been inside of the slowest organizations or at the same time very impactful places? That's why one of the reasons the bigger the organism gets, the slower it moves. How did you always keep yourself, okay, I'm not going to lose this perspective on it? Because then you get bias at some point, right? If you stay so long in such places.
Yeah, so we're less than 10 people, so we're not that big already. So that's really a challenge for me, and maybe one of the things that can kill the company is the ability to grow the company and grow the team without breaking things. But yeah, all I can say at the moment is like the way we've been thinking organization, having all these layers of management are no longer needed, or at least we try them without management layers and going straight into running experiments, running the models directly into interaction with reality, because all the rest can be that the intelligence that we have with the models today can replicate some of the mundane, repetitive tasks that typically people do. And so AI enables direct connection between me, my co-founder, and really like the team and the tests and the suppliers, and make sure that we integrate this very, very well. As things scale, we try to, be as connected, as flat as possible. I don't know if that makes sense. Like a much flatter organization. I don't know how things will be when we get to 100 employee or more than that, but I don't think it will be the case in the next year. That's a far problem.
Do you recall a moment you had a very tough time and it really hurt and you tried to resolve? And what does come to your mind when I ask it?
I'm trying to
could
think.
Be an investor conversation, could be a team within the team, could be within your advisory board, could be like anywhere, like something difficult, really challenge you to your bones.
Yeah, I'm trying. There are several examples. I mean, raising the pre-seed was not easy, doing it, without the YC ecosystem or the YC advice. And so I had to learn everything firsthand, which was good. I suffered, but it was good.
What sort of suffering happened there?
Yeah, taking so many calls and then realizing that in some cases, just investors will, ask you many questions. And in the end, you're in an endless process without getting really like a closure. There are cases there, in some cases I got lucky where I had people trusting me and funding the company. I think one of the hardest moments are the very first moments. If you decide to start a company in hard tech in general, I think this is valuable for many people thinking of starting hard tech companies. It's much, much harder than saying, hey, I'm going to start a software company. I'm going to try, build a website and see what happens and you can build a prototype very quickly if you're doing software, especially with AI. Like literally you can prompt what you get a website and a service. For hard tech is much higher, especially a year and a half ago where AI was not as it is right now. Starting a hard tech company is much harder, but I didn't honestly, I didn't believe in any of the other alternatives. And so like someone has to do this, what I'm thinking of. And it was me. So I started as a solo founder, and then had the chance to meet Drew as my co-founder. But I think those are the kind of the hardest moments. I'm sure we'll have many, and we have challenges every day, but those are much, much harder when you start and your ambition is to build, a company that makes products that are in, tens of millions, hundreds of millions in terms of cost. How can you build that company? How can you scale that company from a small prototype into something that will sell for a lot, billions of dollars in the future?
Feeling you really wanted to get into YC, not just for the accelerator experience, because you have been to another accelerator before that. And when did you get in on your second application, or you applied?
I'm trying to remember. It was like second or third. It was not the first time. Yeah.
What was it? I have a feeling you believed in something strongly about the YC ecosystem. That's why you pursued that.
Yes, and I didn't realize the full advantage until I got in.
I didn't even know, right? Like it was even like I thought it became like that.
Yes. A lot of value. Anyone who's considering applying to YC, I think it's great. It's worth it. Unless like you have like a business that already functional and you're making revenue, you're making massive revenue. Maybe it doesn't make sense. But really, I think most of the cases YC makes a lot of sense on the network side, on the exposure and the lessons learned that will save you billions of dollars, especially in our case. Yeah, I think it was like second or third time. Applied to YC because I wanted, the reason that I had in mind is like I wanted exposure to West Coast. So typically today, most of the VC money is on the West Coast. So I wanted exposure to West Coast, knowing that we're building here in Boston. But yeah, we got accepted. We got an offer, and then I had many people telling me, "Oh, it's hard tech. YC is like for software, SaaS, and all that." And I remember Tom Bloomfield, our partner at YC, connected me with Philip from StarCloud. And Philip told me, like, I asked him, like, "Hey, is this your first time? Is this your first company?" He's like, "No, this is my second company." And he told me, like, even if it's my fourth company, I'll still apply to YC. I was like, okay. I'll do that. Then he gave me other reasons, like more tangible reasons. YC has per year more hard tech companies than any other VC. So literally the network of companies is broad within even hard tech, even if the hard tech is a small portion of each batch.
I think during Sam Altman's time, he started more expanding to hardware startups, and afterwards it started to get even bigger and bigger. It's not just a work of last 2-3 years or right after the advent of AI, right? Probably you also observed that seeds rooted from years ago.
Yeah, there are a few companies doing nuclear. Oklo is one of them. Went to YC. So it's not it dates since Sam Altman was the president of YC. He's like a guy who started like hard tech within Y Combinator, but it was always a small portion. But always had very good companies, companies that we can call and get advice from. Because running a hard tech company is different in many respects to running a software company, and many of the advices may not apply.
What is one thing you learned from Tom Bloomfield that you would always remember for the rest of your life? You started to smile.
Fun about Tom Bloomfield. He's very good with hard tech companies. I don't know if this is fun, but and he has this character where it feels always like he's expecting more from you, even if it's like, "Oh, this is great," but you feel that, oh, you can do better. And in some cases, he tells you like you can do better. In some cases, it's just kind of implied. It's the way he talks, the way he like just convey the information to you. Oh, you can certainly do better. And sometimes plants just a seed. It was like, I was thinking about the very first weeks of YC, and we were just aiming having more and more LOIs, and we got more and more. And then Tom and Kulveer, our two partners, they were like, "Have you thought about getting contract?" Which is way more harder for a nuclear company. And so that planted the seed in our mind. I was like, we'll go in and looking for contract directly, literally at the pre-seed stage. So yeah, I think one thing about him is just like kind of feeling that you can always do better. You can enjoy small successes or even big successes, but you can always do better. And he's good at making you feel that way.
Is there any personal kind of it? Because this was more like a startup business related. Was there anything that also helped you as a human being to see the world differently?
In what context? With Tom?
Like with Tom or within YC interactions within the batch, like the inside of that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think what I see, like you realize, like you see people working very, very hard. Like you see people really working 24/7, having dozens of calls every week, working very, very hard, and that's enjoyable. It's an atmosphere where, like, hey, I can always do better. But they tell you, like, in Paul Graham, like, was asked once, what is the job of the CEO? Should the CEO be, the hardest working person in the company? It was like, no, not necessarily. The CEO's job is to survive 10 years, 15 years. It's a marathon. They try to put you in a position where you can work very, very hard, but at the same time, you're able to survive working very, very hard for a long time. And I think that's very important. And you see advice around that. You see real concrete examples, real life examples of people going through that. And that was very, very, very valuable.
I think also that these are the people who has done this, who had walked the path. It's not that they talk to you, out of theory. Probably that you feel it in the conversations, in the smallest details, in the nuances very clearly.
Yeah, that's one of the major values of YC. They have the community, but also just the sheer amount of experience and interaction with their investors, just specific stories that happened to founders where you're like, okay, yeah, this can save me millions of dollars in the future.
And actually, I just remember doing the demo day that, do you want to tell that story that everyone goes, oh my God, we have a nuclear reactor in the parking lot?
I'm not sure how much I can share about that. So we had one session where Paul Graham was in, and we were talking about the history of YC. It was a whole batch. And Paul Graham and Jessica Livingston, so the two founders of Y Combinator. And we're talking, it was a fireside chat. And at some point, they see smoke outside. So we have our demo in the YC parking lot. So at some point, we see smoke from the outside. And I believe Jessica just made a comment, it's like, what's going on? And then just ignored it. And then 5 minutes later, there's more smoke. And someone just said, I don't know who was exactly, maybe Gary, it was like, oh, we have a nuclear reactor in the parking lot. And so people started freaking out. Who brought this? And so I had to stand up and explain, like, oh, we don't have uranium. This is not operating. And this is not us. But that was a funny moment where I had to explain how nuclear is actually safe.
And it turned out to be one of the electric cables, right?
It was
around the corner that he tweeted about that.
Yeah. It was linked to an electric line outage issue that happened, maybe one transformer. I don't know exactly what was the issue, but yeah, it was not us.
I kind of I keep digging into the questions. Is there anything that you would have loved to answer, but I didn't ask?
Yeah, I think we covered many topics. We covered YC, the technology, nuclear in general. Yeah.
Perhaps based on the poor experience that you accumulated with some of the investors, like what would be the one thing you would request them so that the other deep tech founders don't suffer from that? Like what sort of things that you observed, and what is the best investor profile, and what is the really poor investor profile? Don't waste your time. Just move on to the next.
You have to apply for YC. They have a very good tool for that. That's
the internal kind of like the blacklisted ones. Don't talk to them at all.
Yeah, it's more than that. I mean, we don't want to make investors look bad. I mean, we had the chance to have many of them being supportive, but yeah, in some cases you land into those situations, maybe for good reason. Some people just want more information to get conviction. It's just that there is the YC way of doing things, and it's way better for founders than conventional, traditional fundraising that might take a very long time.
I have a question in my mind. It's more like a personal one. In terms of Kardashev scale, when do you see us making the jump?
Yes, yeah. So if I remember well, scale is leveraging resources within the planet, leveraging the energy of the sun, and then leveraging the energy of the stars and galaxy in total. I think if we can create the sun or something that's similar to the sun, we already jumped that. Okay, so there are two things. You need to create it and you need to control it. And with nuclear, we have this source that is a million times more energy dense. We still are not able to control it at a high conversion rate. So we know how to make nuclear energy, but still are not able to extract a lot more energy from that massive source. So there's this big debate, typically a lot of people pushing for renewables. I think there's a good reason why. For a very long time, we used renewables, even before inventing electricity. People used to transport using wind. So it was for transportation. We used, biomass is essentially solar energy. There's captured by plants. So and the major debate here is between concentrated sources and diffused sources. So typically solar and wind, these are diffused sources, and concentrated sources, this is, fossil fuel, and to a higher extent, this is uranium. I think the civilization had created a clear jump in terms of our capability of increasing the energy per capita when we were able to leverage these concentrated sources, which are coal and natural gas and oil. And then the next step is to leverage uranium, which is much, much higher. We did it to a smaller extent, but the potential there, the S curve, we're just at the beginning of it. It seems dangerous for some people. The first person who invented the fire, I'm not sure that he was agreed by everyone. And it was as a, hey, this is dangerous. And then when people mastered that, it became a really civilization change. So for us, I think, and our goal is to be able to leverage this million times higher energy density and extract it at a much higher rate than what we do with coal and natural gas. So that's the first layer. This is energy. And then typically the way I like to describe civilization is in 3 layers. I have energy, and we're working on it. We have technology, which is making tools. Steve Jobs liked to talk about humans as tool makers, making better tools, better devices. And then the third layer is intelligence. I seen in the first jump of intelligence is inventing language. Intelligence is essentially ability, thinking about complex topics just by using abstraction. And so inventing language was one of them. I think the second jump was inventing the scientific method and math to talk specifically about just the physics without the feelings or without the emotions a human has. So it's really being very, very rational and essentially developing science and building tools that are very, very good using our understanding of science. And I think this next jump is LLMs, is being able to create another layer of abstraction that enhance our capability of abstracting and building models and thinking about stuff through artificial intelligence. So these are 3 layers. We're working on the energy. The more energy you have, the more technology you can build, the more intelligence you can run. So that's our part.
How much of a jump would you bring with your solution? 20 years later, let's say, and things work according to your plan. 20 is quite a long time though. And how do you see the contribution of your work?
Yeah, I think being able to create energy abundance to literally move, we had a massive shift when we moved from essentially muscles. These are our first tools that we had. Humans before combustion engines, they had muscles or animal muscle. If you want to move somewhere for transportation, use an animal. If you wanted to work the land, use an animal. So it's really muscles. And then we moved to a device that is much more power dense, which are the combustion engines. Whether it's natural gas or oil or gas or something of that type. And that enabled us already to have a massive jump in terms of power density. We have created the industrial revolution. We have powered all the digital revolution, our computers and etc. We're creating another jump in terms of power density of devices that we can build. And those new devices, the ones that Apollo is building, will be creating much more energy abundance. They will be able to live on different planets. They will be able to power a lot more intelligence than we do today, and essentially eliminate poverty, or what is conceptualized as poverty is way, way different and actually better than what it used to be thought of as poverty.
And actually, energy is one of the very key elements of it. Imagine that you have abundance of energy, and then the rest is a whole different jump level to everything else. Energy touches everything light touches, right? There isn't anything we can't do. I so much enjoy the conversation, but I know that I need to wrap it up at some point. What I will do, I'm gonna I'm going to give you options. I never give options, but we have a tradition. The previous guest did a question for the next guest. I'm going to pick 3 names and you tell me which questions you want. Deal? Yeah, you just pick the name and I'm going to tell you the question from that person.
Okay. I don't know if I know them, but let's do it.
Let's see. Pele Collins, he's the co-founder of Beyond Reach Labs. They are from Winter batch this year. Or Skylar Chen, building the Moon Hotel.
Okay.
Or let me say, and I have Elias, the founder of Zetascale. This is from Philip's batch, actually.
Let's do the last one. Let's do the oldest batch.
Okay, let's go. So Elias is asking, what do you think the future looks like in 10 years? What do you want the future to look like in 10 years? Are those two the same? It's kind of like touching my soul, final.
I like that question. I think of myself as being a very realist person, and within the reality is me as a player in that reality, is like shaping reality. So I can talk more about the energy side and what I will think, and I think what I want will be what will happen in reality. So in the next 10 years, I think we'll be able, particularly for our company, to scale and produce a lot more reactors within our facilities. We'll be able to power way more data centers, have more orders than we can actually manufacture, which essentially will justify us scaling more. And this essentially will solve the bottleneck for compute. Because the way I see things in the next 10, 15 years is that already we have compute converging to the energy cost. Still today, advanced manufacturing, we need to solve a few things, but it will also converge to the energy cost. So in the future, in the next 10, 15 years, the cost of intelligence and the cost of goods will be limited by the cost of energy. So the lower we can bring it, the more goods we can create, the more intelligence we can have. And I'm committed to make that number as high as possible. How that would look, I have no idea. Because, AI, our ability to substitute, very hard tasks or very energy intensive tasks or complex with intelligence will enable us to do many, many things. I think, living on different planets is not to be excluded, particularly if we have, all the energy. I think humans will have a lot more space to think about the boundaries of what humanity can achieve than doing repetitive tasks that, humans typically do, working on an Excel sheet or like just developing, cash flow performance. I think all that can be done with intelligence. So humans will be spending more time on research, on science, on development, or really the things are on the edge. And we're, close to 9 million people. So we have more people working on these very important topics, which are how can we be able to extend the existence of humanity beyond this planet and also make our lives way better in terms of way of living, in terms of reducing pollution, in terms of reducing carbon emissions. So yeah, making nuclear the dominant clean energy source in the next 10 to 15 years. I'm conscious that I will probably watch this in 15 years. So, but I think that's achievable. That's definitely an achievable goal. Yeah.
When we observe how fast things are going, especially right now, in comparison to anything in the human history, it sometimes becomes inevitable to question. I hope we are going to have containment and alignment in place so that things are not going to go so fast and advanced, and then we'll get out of control and we'll get to a critical level that we are going to get more risks and like more how to manage situations rather than how to lift everybody up. Like kind of Lex Friedman has a sentiment around it that he always touch bases in a couple of the conversations. Yet he goes like, it's impossible that we are the only living creatures in this galaxy. He says, I have a feeling actually there has been living things and then they got advanced so much they destroyed themselves and then they got out of our sight that we don't know even that those ones. It could be us next. And so kind of this is like a little bit of a fun entertainment in mind, but it has some seriousness inside of it too.
Yeah, and I like to think about, humans united to work on these hard problems versus, trying like seeing us as a civilization versus the universe in comparison to just seeing differences between us creates a different mindset. It's like, hey, we're here in this planet, we're humans, we're so tiny, and there's so much to explore and to do and to solve that is way better than looking at our differences and trying to like creating conflicts between humans. And I think just the ability that both more energy that will essentially reduce some of the scarcity that we have on resources in many places will remove those concerns, and people trying to find reasons to fight because the resources are scarce, and more focus on, okay, we have an abundance of energy, we have an abundance of intelligence, an abundance of technology. What is the next step? How can we go and conquer the next frontier of science, of the universe?
I can't think of any better way than this to end our conversation. Assil, thank you so much. It was pure fun and pleasure having you today. Thank you.
It was great talking to you. All right.
I'll see you. Let's stay in touch.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.